He rejected her. Right there in the boardroom on the 45th floor, rain slamming the windows like it was trying to break the glass and pull everyone out into the storm. Lucian Blackthorn stood at the head of that long table, 6'4" of pure power in a black suit that looked like it was cut to remind you exactly who owned the room. And he locked eyes with Elara Voss and spoke the 4 words that tore her world in half. "You are not my mate." No shout, no warning, just that deep, steady voice that could close a billion-dollar deal or make the whole room go dead silent. And the same man who built an empire from nothing, who walked through these halls like the rest of us were already beneath him. Lucian Blackthorn, billionaire, Alpha, the one everyone feared and no one could get close to. And in front of his entire executive team, 20 of the most powerful people in his world, he publicly cut her loose like she was nothing. Elara stood there frozen while those words hit her chest like a hammer. 24 years old, the quiet assistant who had spent 2 years keeping his life running, who knew exactly how he took his coffee, who stayed late when everyone else went home, who had let herself fall for him even though every instinct told her it was dangerous. Now she was the center of the worst kind of silence. Face burning hot, stomach dropping, every eye in the room staring straight at her. The rain kept pounding the glass. Her heart was so loud she was sure they could all hear it breaking. What nobody in that room knew, what not one of them could have guessed, was that she was already carrying his child. 3 months along, the secret she had been holding alone, waiting for the right moment that never came. And right then, as his rejection still hung in the air, something old and powerful started waking up in her blood. A heat she had never felt before spread low in her belly, a pull that made her fingers twitch and her pulse race faster. Her hands stayed perfectly still at her sides, but inside she was already burning. Let me take you right into it so you feel exactly how this landed. Elara Voss had always been the one who stayed invisible at Blackthorn Global. The girl who kept her head down, wore the plain blouses and straight skirts, spoke softly, and got the work done without anyone noticing. She knew Lucian's schedule better than her own. She knew the exact way his jaw flexed when a deal was slipping. She knew the sound of his footsteps coming down the marble hallway before he even turned the corner. She had memorized the rare moments when his voice lost its edge, and he almost sounded human. Lucian was 32, tall, broad, built like someone who could handle anything the world threw at him. Cold, guarded. The kind of man who never let anyone close enough to see what lived under that iron control. He ran his company like a king who answered to no one. He made calls that shook markets and changed lives while the rest of us just tried to keep up. He ruled the corporate world by day and the hidden werewolf packs by night with the same quiet, absolute authority. People called him the Ice Wolf in whispers when they thought he couldn't hear. He didn't smile for cameras. He didn't explain himself. He decided and the world bent. Until 3 months ago. That single night after the corporate retreat in the mountains. The air had been thick with everything they had never said out loud. Too many long days. Too much tension that had built for months. One moment when the walls cracked. Too much wine and the kind of heat that neither of them planned on. His hands on her skin. His voice dropping rough when he said her name, like it actually meant something. The way he held her afterward like she was the only real thing in his world. They never spoke about it again, pretended it hadn't happened, until this moment. And now he had stood up in front of everyone and told her she wasn't his. That whatever had passed between them was a mistake he was erasing in public. She felt it like a punch or straight to the chest. Her throat closed up. Her legs wanted to give out. And underneath the sharp, crushing pain of that rejection, that strange new heat kept spreading through her veins, slow and steady. like something ancient had finally heard the call and decided it was time. If it had been you standing there, would you have stayed silent? Would you have kept your chin up and walked out with whatever pride you had left? Or would you have demanded answers right there in front of all of them, even if it meant falling apart completely? Because here's what made it worse. Lucian didn't look like a man who had won. His hands were clenched so tight at his sides the knuckles stood out white. His jaw was locked hard enough that the muscle jumped. He spoke those words like they were being dragged out of him, like every syllable hurt him more than it hurt her. Elara turned slowly. The click of her heels on the polished floor echoed in the dead quiet. She walked out of the boardroom and let the heavy doors shut behind her with a soft final sound that felt louder than anything else in her life. She made it to the elevator before the first tear burned down her cheek. And up in his private office, Lucian Blackthorn stood at the wall of glass, watching her leave through the driving rain, his chest rising and falling like he was fighting to stay in control. He had just rejected his fated mate in front of the entire team. But the connection between them wasn't finished, not even close. Whatever was waking up inside Elara right now was only getting stronger. And Lucian knew it. He just didn't know how much longer he could keep fighting it. The moon doesn't care what we decide in boardrooms. Some bonds refuse to stay broken. And this one was only beginning to pull them both under. She made it to the elevator before the tears really started falling. But the worst part wasn't even the rejection itself. It was everything that came after. Oh. The doors slid shut and the elevator dropped. Floor after floor. And Elara just stood there staring at her own reflection in the polished steel, trying to hold herself together while her mind screamed. How do you breathe after something like that? How do you keep standing when the man you've been quietly in love with for 2 years just looked you in the eye and told the entire room you were nothing to him? Blackthorn Global wasn't just a building, it was a world. 48 floors of sleek glass and cold marble that hid more than anyone on the outside could ever imagine. From the street, it looked like any other luxury corporate tower. All sharp lines, glowing windows, and the kind of money that made people stop and stare. But once you were inside, once you knew what to look for, you saw the truth. Faint wolf runes carved into the stone foundations near the elevators. Subtle pack symbols worked into the artwork on the walls. The entire place ran on 2 sets of rules, the ones written in the employee handbook and the ones whispered only among the wolves. Every vice president, every senior director, every person who sat in those closed-door meetings, they weren't just colleagues, they were pack, and they all answered to one man. Elara had lived inside that world for 2 years, and it had slowly become her own private hell. She was the assistant nobody really saw, the girl they sent on coffee runs when the real executives were too busy, the one who got the sharp words when a deadline slipped, even if it wasn't her fault, the one who stayed until 10 or 11 at night, rewriting reports that other people proudly presented as their own. She was brilliant with numbers. She could spot patterns in spreadsheets that saved the company millions. But no one ever gave her credit. To them, she was just weak. Omega scent. Easy to overlook. Easy to push around. Easy to forget the moment she left the room. She kept her head down, wore the plain blouses and straight skirts, spoke softly, and tried to survive each day without drawing attention. But every single day she felt it. The way eyes slid past her, the way conversations stopped when she walked by, the way her ideas were ignored until someone higher up repeated them. It wore on her. It chipped away at her until some day she wondered if she even existed outside of Lucian's shadow. And Lucian, he was the sun everything orbited around, dominant in a way that made the air feel heavier when he walked into a room. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to make people obey. Protective when it suited him. He'd once quietly fixed a lower-level employee's medical bills without ever telling anyone. but extremely dangerous when someone crossed him. His eyes could pin you in place. His silence could make executives sweat. He ruled the company with absolute control, and the hidden werewolf packs with the same iron grip. People feared him. They respected him. They never, ever challenged him. But Elara had seen the cracks. She had seen the way his shoulders relaxed just a fraction when no one else was watching. She had heard the rare softness in his voice on late-night calls. She had felt the heat of his hands 3 months ago and knew there was something more underneath all that ice, which is why the boardroom moment cut so deep. Let's go back there, not just the surface. Let's sit inside it with her so you can feel exactly what she felt 3 hours earlier. The meeting had started ordinary enough. Lucian sat at the head of the long mahogany table, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp as he went through the quarterly numbers. Elara stood quietly against the wall like she always did, tablet in hand, ready to take notes. She was used to being background. But then something changed. Lucian's head snapped up. His nostrils flared just slightly. His gaze locked on her across the room like a spotlight had suddenly turned on. The mate bond, that invisible thread she had felt pulling at her since that one night 3 months ago, suddenly snapped tight in his chest too. She saw it in his eyes. The recognition, the flash of something raw and unguarded. He didn't hesitate. He stood slowly, all 6'4" of him, rising like a storm gathering, and spoke in that calm, commanding voice that carried to every corner of the room. Elara Voss is no longer needed in these meetings. In fact, she's being demoted effective immediately. She will handle basic administrative tasks only, nothing more. The room went dead silent. Then he looked straight at her, eyes hard, and delivered the final blow. She is a distraction, and she is not Luna material. Not now, not ever. 20 high-ranking executives, every single one of them wolves loyal to him, stared at her. Some looked shocked. Others had small, mocking smiles tugging at the corners of their mouths. Whispers started immediately, low and cruel, meant for her to hear. Did you hear that? Not Luna material? Guess the little Omega finally got what was coming to her. Thought she could climb the ladder on her back, huh? The words landed like physical blows. Elara felt her chest tighten until breathing became a struggle. Her wolf, that part of her she had always kept quiet and buried deep, howled inside her ribcage, furious and desperate, and aching with betrayal. It wanted to lunge forward, to bare teeth, to demand answers. But the humiliation burned hotter. It flooded her face, her neck, her entire body until she felt like she might actually collapse right there on the expensive carpet. Anger rose up right behind it. Hot, sharp anger that made her hands shake. And underneath all of it, burning desire still lingered like a traitor. Even now, even after he had just publicly destroyed her, some stupid part of her still wanted him. Still felt the pull. Still remembered the way he had looked at her that night in the mountains. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to step forward and tell the whole room the truth, that she was carrying his child, that the bond he was denying was real. But she didn't. She just stood there, throat closed, eyes stinging, while his commanding voice echoed off the glass walls and the pack's mocking glances carved into her like claws. That was the moment the rejection became real, public, complete, in front of the entire inner circle, and it broke something inside her. Now back to the present. Elara sat at her small desk on the 32nd floor, quietly packing her things into a plain cardboard box. A couple of notebooks, a framed photo of her mother from years ago, the spare umbrella she kept for days exactly like this one. Her hands moved slowly, mechanically, while her mind replayed the boardroom scene on an endless loop. Every whisper, every mocking smile. The way Lucian's voice had stayed so steady, so final. She kept asking herself the same questions over and over. Why? Why do this now? Why humiliate her in front of everyone when he could have pulled her aside? What was he so afraid of that he had to destroy her publicly? High above on the 45th floor, Lucian stood behind the glass wall of his private office, arms crossed, watching her silently from the shadows. He didn't move. He didn't come down. He just watched. His face was unreadable, but his shoulders were tense. His jaw was locked so tight the muscles stood out. He looked like a man fighting a war no one else could see. Her mind drifted back again to that one forbidden night 3 months ago. The mountain retreat. The private cabin away from the main group. The fire crackling low. The way that tension that had built between them for months finally snapped. His hands sliding up her back, slow and sure. The low growl in his throat when he pulled her closer. The way he had whispered her name like it was something sacred, something he had been holding back for too long. For those few hours, he hadn't been the cold Alpha CEO. He had been hers, completely, fiercely, like nothing else in the world existed. The heat of his skin, the way his breath caught when she touched him, the quiet moments afterward when he held her like he never wanted to let go. They never spoke about it again, pretended it hadn't happened, until today. Now the memory felt like salt in an open wound. She finished packing the box and stood up, legs shaky under her. As she walked toward the elevator, the rain-soaked parking garage waited below. The moment she stepped out into the downpour, the cold hit her like a slap. She clutched her stomach with one hand. The first real pregnancy hint is that small protective gesture she couldn't stop herself from making, while the other arm held the cardboard box tight against her chest. The rain soaked through her clothes instantly. She didn't care. If your fated mate rejected you like that in public, would you still feel the pull? Would you still want him even after he humiliated you in front of his entire pack and made you feel smaller than you ever thought possible? Be honest with yourself right now. Would the anger win? Or would that stubborn, aching desire still be there underneath it all, refusing to die? Because for Elara, it was both. Even now, with humiliation still burning hot in her chest and anger mixing with something dangerously close to longing, she felt it. That pull, that stupid, stubborn bond that refused to break no matter how hard he tried to sever it. She was almost at her car when her phone suddenly buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. She stared at the screen, rain dripping down her face, heart stuttering. At the exact same moment, a strange heat began crawling under her skin. Slow, steady, and impossible to ignore. It started low in her belly and spread outward, warm and insistent. It like something inside her had finally decided it was done waiting. Something was happening, and whatever it was, it had just started. She barely made it through her apartment door before the heat really hit her. Elara dropped the soggy cardboard box right there on the worn rug, kicked her wet shoes off, and leaned her back against the door like she could somehow keep the whole day from following her inside. Her clothes were soaked from the rain, but that wasn't the problem. The real heat was coming from somewhere deep inside her, starting low in her belly where she had clutched herself in the parking garage, and slowly crawling outward like liquid fire, finding every vein in her body. She pressed both hands to her cheeks. Her skin felt scalding, too hot, too tight. Like her own body was suddenly a stranger that no longer fit quite right. She forced herself into the tiny bathroom, flicked on the harsh overhead light, and stared at the mirror. The woman looking back at her looked exhausted. Pale face, damp hair plastered to her neck, eyes wide and a little wild. She tried to breathe normally, in, out, just get through this night. But then the first whisper slid through her mind, soft, clear, and completely not her own. Blood calls blood. Elara froze mid-breath. The voice was old, female, calm in a way that made her stomach drop, like she had missed a step on the stairs. It wasn't loud. It wasn't shouting. It felt like it had been waiting years to speak and had finally found the right moment. She shook her head hard, trying to clear it, but the heat only flared hotter. Her veins felt like they were glowing under her skin, not painful yet, but alive. Pulsing, stretching, waking up after being asleep for way too long. Her fingertips started tingling. She looked down and watched her nails push forward just a fraction, the edges sharpening into tiny points that pressed against the skin like they wanted out. She shoved her hands under the cold tap water, but the tingling only grew stronger, like her body was ignoring every command she gave it. Her heartbeat quickened, and somewhere out in the storm beyond her window, a low, distant howl rose up that matched the exact rhythm of her pulse. One beat, pause, another howl. It wasn't random, it was syncing with her. She gripped the edge of the sink until her knuckles turned white. Were telling herself it was just the wind, just her imagination after the worst day of her life, just stress making her hear things. But deep down, she knew better. Something was wrong inside her. Something was shifting. And it had started the exact moment Lucian had looked her in the eyes and told the entire room she wasn't his. She lifted her gaze back to the mirror. For a split second, her irises flashed a bright, unnatural gold before snapping back to their normal hazel. She blinked hard. It happened again. Gold, then gone. Like whatever lived inside her was testing the waters, deciding if it was safe to show itself. She backed away until her spine hit the cold wall, a chest rising and falling fast. The whispers returned, layering over each other this time, quieter but impossible to ignore. Blood calls blood. The line remembers what was taken. She hid you so well, little one. Elara slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold tile floor, knees pulled tight to her chest like that could somehow hold everything together. Her mind wouldn't stop spinning. What line? What had been taken? And who was she? The questions kept coming, each one pulling her deeper into a place she wasn't sure she wanted to go. She had spent her whole life feeling ordinary, forgettable, weak. And now something ancient was waking up, and it felt like it had been waiting specifically for this night. The night Lucian had publicly humiliated her and torn the mate bond apart in front of everyone. That's when her eyes landed on the small wooden box she kept on the shelf above the sink. The only thing she had left from her mother, an old family heirloom, a simple carved pendant on a silver chain that her mother had worn every single day till the day she passed. Elara had never really looked at it closely. It always felt too heavy, too full of things she didn't understand. But tonight her hand moved toward it on its own. The second her fingers brushed the carved wood, the pendant inside began to glow. A soft, warm amber light that pulsed in perfect time with her heartbeat. She opened the box with shaking hands. The pendant lifted slightly, hovering for just a moment above the velvet lining before settling back down, still glowing like it had been waiting for her touch. The whispers grew clearer, more insistent. Your mother carried the old blood, the lost Luna line. They thought they erased us from history, but blood always finds its way back. She ran for years to keep you hidden. Now the bond is pulling everything into the light. Elara's breath caught hard in her throat. Her mother, the quiet, gentle woman who had raised her alone, moving them from one city to another every few years, who had never spoken much about her own family, who had always seemed a little afraid of the dark. Who was she really? Why had she hidden so much? Why had she looked over her shoulder every time they left the house? Why had she made Elara promise never to ask questions about their past? The open loop sat there in her mind, heavy and addictive. Who was Elara's mother really? And why was every piece of her life wrapped in secrets that were only now starting to come undone? The pendant grew warmer in her palm. The heat in her veins answered it immediately, flaring hotter, spreading further. Her wolf, the part that had howled in pure rage during the boardroom, was no longer quiet. It was pushing forward, stretching against the inside of her ribs. I were testing how much of her human body it could claim tonight. She stood up slowly, legs unsteady, and moved back in front of the mirror. She stared at her own reflection, searching for any sign of the girl she had been this morning. Then, without thinking, she whispered his name into the quiet room. Lucian. The moment the word left her lips, the mirror cracked. A single sharp line shot across the glass right between her eyes, spiderwebbing outward like a claw had dragged down the center. She gasped and stepped back. The crack wasn't random. It looked deliberate, angry, alive. The whispers returned louder now, almost urgent. He rejected the bond, but the bond does not accept rejection. The Alpha will feel every crack you feel. The old blood will demand what is owed. He cannot run from this any more than you can. Her hands started shaking harder. The claws at her fingertips were more obvious now, pressing against her skin like they wanted to break free completely. The distant howls outside seemed closer, perfectly synced with every heavy beat of her heart. The fever climbed higher. Sweat beaded on her forehead, even though the apartment was cool. So, every breath felt like it carried a question she couldn't answer yet. What if this power growing inside her was the reason Lucian had pushed her away? What if he had sensed it before she did? What if the rejection wasn't about her being weak, but about her being something far more dangerous than he could control? She was still staring at the cracked mirror, mind racing through every possible terrifying answer, when her phone suddenly lit up on the bathroom counter. Lucian's personal number, the one almost no one in the company had access to. The screen glowed bright in the dim light. The phone vibrated once, paid twice, demanding, insistent, like he already knew something was happening to her. Elara stared at it, chest tight, the heat under her skin flaring in direct response to his name on the screen. 4 full seconds of complete silence filled the room, nothing but the rain hammering the window and her own ragged breathing. Then a single deep heartbeat thumped loud and heavy in her ears, like the moon itself was marking the exact second everything changed. She reached out, fingers trembling so badly she almost dropped the phone, and answered the call. She answered the phone, and his voice cut through the line like a hook sinking deep. Shannon, be back in the office, now. No apology for what he had done in the boardroom. No explanation. Just that rough, commanding tone that wrapped around her chest and pulled. Elara stood frozen in her cracked bathroom, the glowing pendant still warm against her palm, the strange new heat still crawling through her veins like it had been waiting for his voice to ignite it. She hated how fast her body responded. She hated how her mouth formed the word okay before her mind could scream that she should hang up and never go back. But she went. 30 minutes later, with the elevator doors opened on the 45th floor, and there he was, Lucian Blackthorn, waiting like he already owned every second of her night. His suit jacket was gone, sleeves rolled up to his forearms, the top buttons of his shirt undone just enough to show the hard line of his collarbone. His eyes locked onto her the moment she stepped out. And for the first time since the boardroom, she saw it, the crack. His breathing wasn't steady. His jaw was clenched, but his gaze burned with something raw and barely contained. He had tracked her scent across the rain-soaked city. She could feel it in the way he inhaled slowly, deliberately, like he was fighting the urge to pull her against him right there in the hallway. "You're not an assistant anymore," he said, voice low and final, vibrating through her bones. "You're my special consultant now. You work directly with me, In my private penthouse office, starting tonight. No arguments. Elara's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. She wanted to throw every humiliating word he had spoken earlier back at him. She wanted to ask why he had destroyed her in front of his entire pack if he couldn't even stay away for one night. But the words wouldn't come, because standing this close to him made her body betray her. The heat under her skin flared hotter in response to his nearness, mixing with the old mate bond until she felt dizzy, pulled in two directions at once, anger and aching, terrifying want. He didn't wait for her to agree. He turned and walked toward the private elevator that led straight to the top floor penthouse suite, expecting her to follow. And she did. Her feet moved before her pride could stop them. Because even after he had publicly rejected her, even after he had called her worthless in front of 20 wolves, who now looked at her with mocking pity, some deep, hungry part of her still craved his gravity. The elevator ride-up was unbearable. They stood side by side in the small mirrored space. The air felt thick enough to choke on. Lucian reached past her to press the button, and his hand brushed her waist. Just the lightest graze of fingers through her still damp blouse. But it wasn't light. It burned. Heat radiated from his palm straight into her skin, spreading like wildfire. She sucked in a sharp breath. He didn't pull away immediately. His fingers lingered, pressing just a fraction harder, as if testing how she would react. Her pulse skyrocketed. She could feel his chest rising and falling inches from her shoulder, heavy and uneven. His scent, dark, masculine, with that wild, untamed edge, flooded her senses until the rest of the world blurred. Their eyes met in the mirrored wall. His gaze dropped to her lips. Hers dropped to his. The space between them shrank without either of them moving. His head tilted down slowly. She could feel the warmth of his breath on her forehead, then lower. Her wolf purred inside her chest, pushing her forward, begging her to close the last inch. She wanted it. God, she wanted his mouth on hers, wanted him to stop pretending he didn't feel the same pull that was tearing her apart. Her lips parted slightly. His hand tightened on her waist. Then his phone vibrated harshly in his pocket. A sharp red alert lit up the screen. Rival pack breach detected. Lucian jerked back like someone had thrown cold water on him. The almost kiss shattered. His eyes darkened with frustration and barely leashed violence. He growled low in his throat, a possessive, dangerous sound that sent shivers racing down her spine even as disappointment crashed through her. The elevator doors opened into his private penthouse office, a vast, luxurious space of dark wood, deep leather furniture, and wall-to-wall windows overlooking the storm-lashed city. He led her inside without another word, but the tension between them hadn't disappeared. It had only coiled tighter, ready to snap. Hours later, long after midnight, the rest of the building was silent and empty. They were still there. Elara sat at the long desk he had cleared for her, pretending to read the documents in front of her. While every nerve in her body stayed hyper-focused on him, Lucian paced near the windows like a predator trapped in a too-small cage, his broad back to her, shoulders rigid with tension. The silence stretched until it felt like a living thing pressing against her skin. Then he stopped pacing, turned, and crossed the room in 3 powerful strides. He stopped right in front of her chair, towering over her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. The heat from his body poured over her in waves. She could see the faint sheen of sweat along his neck, the way his chest rose and fell with each controlled breath. His gaze pinned her in place, heavy, possessive, impossible to escape. "You should have stayed away," he growled, voice rough and low, the sound rumbling through her like thunder. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, almost desperate. After what I said in that boardroom, after I humiliated you in front of everyone, you should have run as far and as fast as you could. His hand lifted slowly. Fingers hovered near her cheek, trembling with restraint, not quite touching, but close enough that the warmth of his skin made her breath hitch. The eye contact felt like a physical claim, raw, unrelenting, marking her without a single touch. Desire flooded her so strongly it scared her, mixed with fear that made her stomach tighten. She wanted him to close the distance. She was terrified of what would happen if he finally gave in. Lucian leaned in closer. His lips brushed the shell of her ear as he whispered, hot breath sending sparks down her neck. I'm not the man you think I am, Elara. If you stay here with me tonight, I might not be able to stop myself from claiming what's mine, even though I know I should. The words hit her like a drug. Her skin tingled where his breath touched. The new power awakening inside her surged in response, twisting with the old mate bond until her whole body felt electric. She could barely think. All she could do was feel. The dangerous pull, the terrifying want, the way every rejection he had thrown at her only made this moment more addictive. He pulled back just enough to look at her again. His eyes were darker now, pupils wide with raw obsession. He couldn't hide it anymore. Couldn't stop watching her. Couldn't stop breathing her in like she was the only air he needed. He rejected her publicly, dragged her name through the dirt in front of his entire pack. Yet here he is, hours later, barely able to keep his hands off her. Be honest with yourself right now. If a man like Lucian looked at you with that kind of hunger after everything he put you through, would you forgive him? Would you lean in and let him claim you anyway? Or would you finally find the strength to walk away before it destroys you both? Because Elara wasn't sure she could walk away anymore. The storm outside kept raging against the glass. The heat between them kept rising with every shared breath. And somewhere deep inside her, the whispers from earlier returned, soft but insistent. The bond does not accept rejection. Whatever was happening between them had crossed a line. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was obsession. And it was only getting stronger. The longer you stare at this screen, the harder it becomes to look away, because you already know the next chapter is going to hurt even more. Utterly. The air in the penthouse office felt like it had turned to stone. Elara stood with her back pressed against the edge of the massive desk. Lucian's body so close she could feel the heat rolling off him in waves. Her skin still tingled from where his fingers had almost touched her cheek moments ago. Her mind was a storm of desire and fear, but she forced the words out anyway, voice barely above a whisper. Tell me why, really why. No more half-truths, no more pushing me away and then dragging me back. I deserve to know what the hell is happening to me, to us. Lucian's eyes, those sharp, unreadable eyes that had once made her feel invisible and then made her feel claimed, flickered with something she had never seen in him before. Not just regret, not just pain, a deep, soul-crushing torment that made her stomach twist because this was the man who never broke, never showed weakness, and now he looked like he was shattering right in front of her. He swallowed hard, the muscle in his jaw jumping. His hands gripped the desk on either side of her hips, caging her without touching, like he was afraid if he let go, he would fall apart completely. Your bloodline, he said, with the words scraping out like they had been buried for years. It's not just powerful, Elara. You carry the ancient queen's line, the very bloodline my pack hunted down and nearly wiped out 15 years ago. They slaughtered entire families to make sure that power died. Your mother, she was the last survivor. She ran. She hid you, changed your name, moved you every few years so no one would ever connect the dots. But the moment I scented you 3 months ago, I knew. And when the mate bond snapped into place that night in the mountains, I realized I had just bound myself to the one woman my pack had spent generations trying to erase. Elara felt the words punch straight through her ribs. Her knees weakened. The glowing pendant in her pocket burned hotter against her thigh, as if confirming every syllable. All those years of feeling small, worthless, overlooked. It wasn't because she was weak. It was because her own mother had been hiding a legacy so dangerous that an entire pack had tried to kill it out of existence. The whispers she had heard in her bathroom echoed louder now. The line remembers what was taken. Her mother had sacrificed everything. Her home, her peace, maybe even her own power, just to keep Elara alive. And now that same power was waking up inside her because of the very man who had publicly humiliated her today. Lucian's voice dropped even lower, raw with self-loathing. I rejected you in that boardroom because I had no choice. Not because I didn't want you, not because you weren't enough, but because claiming you would light a match under every old enemy we have. Your blood calls to power that could tear my pack apart, and I couldn't let that happen to you. I couldn't let them come for you the way they came for your mother's family. The betrayal hadn't even fully landed yet. That came next. Lucian's eyes darkened with a pain so deep it looked physical. He leaned in closer, forehead almost touching hers, voice breaking as the next truth tore out of him. There's something else, something I've carried alone for years. I'm cursed, Elara, a deadly curse that runs through my father's bloodline. Any true mate I fully claim, any woman I mark and bind myself to, it triggers my slow descent into a feral monster. My wolf takes over completely, no control, no humanity left. Just endless rage, bloodlust, and destruction until the man I am now is gone forever. I watched it happen to my father. I watched him turn on my mother. I watched him destroy everything he loved. I swore I would never let that happen to anyone else, especially not you. So I rejected you in the most public, brutal way possible. I called you a distraction. I said you weren't Luna material. I let my entire pack watch me break you, because I thought if I hurt you enough, the bond would fracture before the curse could lock on. I thought I was saving your life by destroying your heart. Elara's breath caught. Tears stung her eyes, hot and angry. The humiliation she had felt in that boardroom, the mocking whispers, the way every executive had stared at her like she was nothing. It hadn't been about her being unworthy. It had been about Lucian trying to protect her from a fate worse than death. The man she had fallen for, the man whose touch still made her burn, had chosen to become the villain in her story so she wouldn't have to watch him become a monster. But the deepest cut was still coming. Ashram. Lucian's hands finally moved, one sliding up to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. His voice cracked completely now, raw and trembling with betrayal of his own. And the worst part, the person I trusted most helped me do it. My beta, Marcus, the vice president you've sat across from in every meeting, he knew about the curse. He knew about your bloodline. He knew exactly what claiming you would cost me, and he pushed for the public rejection. He stood right next to me in that boardroom and whispered in my ear, "Make it hurt. Make sure she never comes back. It's the only way to protect the pack." He used my fear like a weapon. The man I've fought beside for years, the one I called brother, he manipulated me into breaking you because he was terrified of what your power would mean for his own position. He wanted you gone before anyone else could find out who you really are. The betrayal landed like a second rejection, deeper, sharper, more personal. Not only had Lucian chosen pain over love, but the one person he had trusted with his darkest secret had twisted that choice into something even crueler. Elara felt her chest cave in. Anger, grief, and a heartbreaking kind of love crashed together inside her until she couldn't tell which emotion was winning. How do you forgive the man who destroyed you to save you? How do you trust again when the people closest to him had used your pain as a strategy? Lucian's forehead finally rested against hers, his breath warm and ragged against her lips. His voice was barely a whisper now, broken and desperate. I claimed you the night we met, that night in the mountains, when I held you like you were the only real thing in my world, when I whispered your name like a prayer. I already claimed you in every way that mattered. I just couldn't watch you die because of me. I couldn't let the curse take you the way it took everything else I've ever loved. The confession hung between them, heavy with years of silent suffering. Elara's tears fell freely now. Her hands lifted on their own, pressing against his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart under her palms. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to run. But more than anything, she wanted to pull him closer and tell him she understood, even if it terrified her. She opened her mouth to speak, to tell him the truth burning in her chest, that she was still here, still his, curse or no curse, when the entire building suddenly jolted. Alarms screamed through the penthouse speakers. Red emergency lights flooded the room in violent strobes. Lucian's head snapped toward the windows, and his body instantly shifting from broken lover to lethal alpha. His shoulders broadened. His eyes flashed with dangerous gold. "They're here," he growled, voice no longer fully human. "Rival alphas. They sensed your power awakening the second it flared. They've breached the lower levels. They're coming straight for you." Distant howls rose from the streets below. Savage, hungry, too many to count, drawn like predators to the scent of Elara's ancient blood, now burning bright inside her. The intimate confession, the raw vulnerability, the devastating truths they had just laid bare. It all shattered in an instant. Lucian pulled her behind him, his body a living shield. The curse he had just confessed to, the feral monster he feared becoming, hovered dangerously close to the surface, claws already pressing under his skin. Elara's own power surged in response, the pendant in her pocket blazing hot. The ancient queen's blood whispered promises of strength she didn't yet know how to use. The building shook again. Footsteps, heavy, fast, murderous, echoed up from the floors below. They were coming, and in that single frozen moment, when everything they had just torn open hung in the balance. Love, betrayal, curse, power, and the terrifying question of whether any of it would survive the night. The storm outside roared, but the real war had just walked through the front door. And you already know you can't stop watching now. The building shook violently for the third time. Red emergency lights flashed like warning signals across the shattered penthouse. Glass crunched under heavy boots as the rival alphas closed in, their eyes glowing with vicious hunger. The leader stepped forward, lips pulled back in a savage grin. Claws already dripping with blood from the guards they had torn through on the lower floors. "Hand over the queen's bitch, Blackthorn," he snarled. "Her blood is singing loud enough to wake every old enemy you have. We'll take her, one way or another." Lucian's entire body changed in an instant. He shoved Elara behind him with one powerful arm, his shoulders ripping wider as the partial shift tore through him. Bones cracked and reformed. Dark fur rippled across his forearms and neck. His eyes, though sharp, my beautiful eyes that had once looked at her with cold distance and then burning obsession, began turning black from the edges inward. Veins along his neck and jaw glowed with dark, unnatural curse energy, spreading like poison under his skin. The man who had just confessed everything was losing the fight against the monster he feared most. He roared, a sound that was half Lucian, half something far more terrifying, and launched himself at the intruders. The fight exploded around them. Furniture smashed. Claws slashed through the air. Blood sprayed across the dark wood floors. Sonic, Lucian moved like pure violence, tearing into the first rival with brutal force, fangs sinking deep. But with every strike, the curse dug deeper. His movements grew wilder, less controlled. The black in his eyes spread until only thin rings of gold remained. The low, feral growl rumbling from his chest no longer sounded like the man who had whispered her name in the mountains. It sounded like the beast he had spent years trying to bury. Elara pressed herself against the desk, heart hammering, the ancient power in her blood surging in response to the danger. The pendant burned hot against her leg. She wanted to help. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream at him to stop before the curse completely took him. Then one of the rivals broke through Lucian's defense and lunged straight for her. Time slowed. Lucian spun with a snarl that shook the windows. In one brutal motion, he slammed the attacker aside and grabbed Elara, yanking her hard against his chest. His arm locked around her waist like steel. His other hand came up to the side of her neck, claws extended, trembling with the last threads of control he still possessed. His face was inches from hers, partially shifted, fangs glinting, eyes almost completely black. Yet even now, drowning in the curse, he looked at her with that same desperate, broken love. "I claimed you the night we met," he growled against her skin, voice distorted and raw. "You're mine. Even if this destroys me, you're still mine." Then instinct took over. His fangs sank into the soft flesh where her neck met her shoulder. Deep, instinctive, claiming. The mark from the title, not gentle, not planned, pure primal need. White-hot pain and overwhelming pleasure exploded through Elara's body at the same time. The mate bond snapped fully into place with brutal force, or searing through her veins like liquid fire. Her own power answered instantly, golden light flaring bright under her skin as the ancient queen's blood roared to life. She cried out, fingers digging into his shoulders, the sensation so intense it blurred the line between ecstasy and agony. For one blinding second, the entire world narrowed to just the two of them. Lucian pulled back, blood on his lips, chest heaving. His eyes, now almost entirely black, locked onto hers. She finally looked into his eyes, Minnan, and realized the man she thought she loved wasn't fully human anymore. The curse had already started to win. The rival alphas regrouped, circling them with vicious snarls, sensing weakness in Lucian's fading control. More howls rose from the floors below, reinforcements climbing fast. Lucian's body trembled violently as the feral monster pushed harder, claws lengthening. The dark energy in his veins spreading further. He still held Elara protectively against him, even as the man inside him began to disappear. The storm outside the shattered windows roared louder than ever. He finally claimed her, but the monster inside him just claimed her back. Will Elara's awakening power be enough to save the Alpha who rejected her? Or will his dark secret destroy them both? The screen freezes on Lucian's feral snarl, fangs bared, eyes completely black, yet still looking at Elara with that last desperate spark of love as the rival wolves close in around them. Would you let him claim you after everything, even knowing the monster inside him is taking over? Drop your prediction for what happens in Part 2 below. I'm reading every comment. Part 2 drops soon. Subscribe and hit the bell. What should Elara do next? Comment now.